Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the People Strategy Forum. We're going to be diving into the complexities and triumphs of managing rapid organizational growth. And today we're thrilled to have Tom Gratian, the founder of the Gratian Group, join us. He has over 25 years of experience spanning startups to Fortune 100 giants like American Express and TikTok. So, Tom is an expert in the organizational design and talent management field. So we're going to really appreciate his skill set here. His strategic insights have powered companies through pivotal growth phases, ensuring they're not only growing to scale, but they're successfully doing this, but they remained robust with their teams overall. So at the Gratian Group, Tom's focus is on transforming organizational structures and the processes around them to optimize performance across various sectors where his clients reside. So we're really welcome to have him here today. So let's get ready to have that enlightening discussion for all you founders out there that are wondering, geez, how do I really get this right? And Tom's going to take us through those important first steps. So first of all, Tom, as we're getting into this discussion here, I would just love to hear a little bit of your background of how you got to where you are today. Welcome.
Well, thanks, Sam. Thanks, comp team, and hi everybody out there. Yeah, I mean, my background started in the dot-com days of the late '90s, and I was a part of rapidly growing startups, and I would see a lot of pain during that, and I actually got to witness it twice because of the dot-com bust. So I got to be a part of growth, failure, growth again. And I always thought, boy, if I could go back there at some point and fix some of those traumas that we all experienced in those days, what a difference I could make. And I ended up going to business school and focusing in this kind of area, and started out in really large companies like American Express. And I was doing big, large organization transformation and change management, multi-thousand person global orgs and restructuring. A lot of it was during the financial crisis. So big restructuring. But I was always kind of having my eye on startups, and that I would work my way backwards to that size again. And I went to entertainment for a while. I was the chief learning officer at Viacom, and headed up learning and talent at NBC Universal. Eventually made my way to TikTok, which was during rapid growth, and finally got to pull all the things together, whether it was individual training and coaching, or team performance, talent management, or the broader large scale org design. I got to do all of that at a stage of hyper growth, and pull it all together, sort of scratch that itch I'd always had at being back in tech startups, and fixing some of those things that I'd seen from my first part of my career.
Well, in working in a lot of those larger organizations and reflecting on what you've learned there and how it applies to startup companies, what's the crossover there? What did you find when you were starting to help some small organizations develop into rapidly growing firms?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's some truths that kind of cut across all organizations. They just look differently depending upon the size and the maturity. The first being, I subscribe to the Jim Collins mantra: first who, then what. Attracting top talent, and specifically in your most critical roles, is the first thing you should focus on. Once you have great talent in those roles, making sure you're managing that talent and developing that talent effectively. And then as you zoom out to the broader org, making sure strategy is clear from top to bottom, and especially not neglecting that middle and the frontline management. And nowadays, with how fast things are, there's certain ways that you can kind of supercharge all of that stuff. I'm sure we'll get into the wave of AI and how you can leverage and use those things, but there's a certain kind of rapid iterative approach that you can take to addressing all of that. And that's really true at a small company, and a large company just looks a little different.
So as the first piece, as you mentioned, that these small organizations, these rapidly growing organizations need to get right, is ensuring that they're bringing in the right people. Is that right?
That's right. And it's probably more important at a stage of rapid growth, because it's almost like turning on a faucet, and let's say there's something wrong with your piping. It's going to become an issue really quickly if the faucet's on full blast, and that's really what rapid growth organizations have in front of them. Is they're going to hire a ton, and then that group of people are going to be the majority of the organization. It's less of an impact in a big, large organization that's hiring small percentages overall relative to the whole. So, you really need to nail the approach. And it's really all about repeatability. If you nail it on the front end, you can get a 4x lift out of the performance of your org. If you wait till they're on the inside and now you're trying to fix things with remediation and training, maybe you can get a 2x lift. So I always subscribe to this funny phrase, you could train a turkey to climb a tree, but you're better off hiring a squirrel.
Yeah, so Shar, I'd love to hear your experience, because I know you've started up a lot of organizations in your entrepreneurial career. So what have you learned in the hiring processes? Have you hired many turkeys?
Not only have I hired turkeys as an HR executive, I even was hiring turkeys when I was 25 years old as an HR coordinator. Anyway, yeah. So as an entrepreneur, yes, when we had started up our business, it was really difficult. I think, getting out of the traditional type of HR role and actually owning and running a multi-million-dollar business of my own. It was fascinating because I would, I think at one point we had like 6 contractors and 23 employees. And yes, I think, because I leveraged, Tom, my background in talent management strategy, I was better at hiring people. However, when I was trying to delegate to my leaders and my managers and directors, I learned they had a competency issue with, and I needed help them understand how to spot the turkeys. So at the time, happy to work with Sam, and we had a TMA tool, and Sam will mention that later. But I was able to have the right competency analysis done, actually equate my interview processes to the competencies, and then align my performance management and coaching, all aspects. Not only that, from a career mobility standpoint, I did emphasize, since we were in kind of a health care marketing space, that this, even you might be making $80,000 right now, but be prepared, because if you go out and buy that big house, we may have to close down. And that's exactly what happened due to federal changes. So, but my employees were happy because at the beginning of the interview and through that process, I explained everything. So yeah, we could talk a lot about this, but it definitely makes a difference to own your own company.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Tom, I mean, as far as that, I mean, as like Shar was saying, hiring right is key, and they come in a couple different categories. You have leadership that you're bringing on, or people that you're working closely with strategically, and then you have those that are really driving performance in the organization. So, have you seen certain gaps that founders have in each of these areas?
Yeah, probably one of the biggest gaps is not realizing that if they're going to be leading and having outsized impact on a bunch of other employees, you may want to assess their ability to lead, not just a functional technical skill. And so it all comes down to having a very, very clear scorecard. So I'm going to steal another approach from GH Smart, which is a leadership assessment firm that works in large part with all the private equity firms who have to really make sure they know what kind of leadership team they're buying. And it's a very simple approach, which is, don't just write down a bunch of day-to-day responsibilities. That's not as important. Their roles and responsibilities and tasks and qualifications aren't as important as, where does this role sit within the broader organization? What strategically are they going to have to contribute? If they're going to be a leader, then you have to actually capture that in what Shar was saying, in the competencies. And so not only do you have to then ask a question in the interview, you need to assign it to a particular person to ensure it gets asked. You need to make sure they know how to ask it, and you need to make sure they know how to take notes and then score it. And then if you're looking at all of your potential candidates, imagine they're in a spreadsheet and each of them is a row. Or as a column, there should be a row on leadership ability. and each of them should have a score so that you can weigh. And if that's super important to the role itself, you should be looking at the leaders that have the greater leadership scores as your more likely candidate.
Well, I like that, Tom, because that's what I did put in place as a rating score system. You know, a lot of my leaders were so brand new.
Yeah.
And they just thought that the interview question should be, what's your biggest strength and what's your biggest weakness? You know, what's your goal in 5 years? It's like,
Yeah.
no, our questions are going to be as such that we align them on a rating sheet, competencies, and then also have the proper, as an HR lady, as you understand this, just have the proper documencies from a discrimination perspective and equal opportunity. Obviously, you know, we know the nation is up in heaval about equality, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So from a legal standpoint, it's also very vital. And some of my leaders were struggling with that, but I think with the right coaching, we can make it really easy for them and use technology, as you know, and AI, as you know.
And Shar, you mentioned the other benefit, which is counterintuitive to a lot of people, which is that it actually, if you have very clear outcomes written in a job description that the person's going to be responsible for, and then you back up from those outcomes to a set of competencies, it's super clear and motivating to the candidate. You know, when they apply, they can really see what they're going to be held accountable to. When they get the interview question, they can see that it makes perfect sense vis-a-vis the competencies and the outcomes they're supposed to drive. And you'll get a very positive, from an employer value standpoint, you'll get a positive reaction from your candidates. They'll say, these are the clearest job descriptions I've ever seen.
I'm just going to quickly say that you got comp team here. Look at these men or these wonderful professionals. Comp team can help you get your job description right. And also use technology to do so, because we had such antiquated job descriptions in healthcare systems that we had 4,000 in one small healthcare system. We had over 4,000 job descriptions that were not compliant with ADA, that were not compliant with the disability accommodation, that were outdated, antiquated. And that's why I'm promoting Sam and Howard and Sumit here and the team, because that's good. And with your partnership, which is why I'm involved, talent management strategy in alignment with compensation architecture and competency, planning, and everything you're saying is the magical, what can happen for a company so the HR is not feeling so overwhelmed. Because I was a broad generalist, and I'll shut up, but I was a broad generalist, and I'm not an expert in comp, job descriptions, every single aspect in the world. It takes a village. But I'd love to hear what my colleagues have to say, Howard and Sumit. So
I have a question, Tom. What do organizations miss, especially young organizations and startups, miss when they're assessing candidates for a role? They may see people that seem to be a great fit, but what are they, from your experience, what do they tend to overlook or not really thoroughly vet?
Yeah, well, I mean, I say first and foremost, just this process. I think one of the other things that you should think is we're managing a system for repeatability, not individuals and people within the system. If you set up an infrastructure and it doesn't have to be complicated, let's say you can't afford a talent management or, talent acquisition, applicant tracking system, that's fine. But you do need to know from a process standpoint, we're going to all align on this scorecard in a meeting. It's going to then make up a series of rows in a spreadsheet, and every candidate we evaluate is going to get a score with some notes so that we can see them side by side. So first and foremost, just a process and a system that builds repeatability, and everybody is on the same page. So I'm the guy who asks the leadership question of every one of these candidates, and I fill in that row. So system and process for repeatability, but also a lot of times people forget, and we already covered the leadership piece, so that's number 2. People also forget culture. So, culture is supposed to be an enabler of your strategy. So if you have a particular winning aspiration to beat a competitor and you're going to capture a certain market of customers or product category or geography, usually there's a certain kind of culture you need that fits with the organizational competency required to achieve that strategy. And that should be detailed. That should be written out in some part of your company manifestos, and it should take shape in that same process. So let's just say, for example, you are trying to cultivate an extremely creative and innovative culture. There's certain aspects of willingness to fail and learn from failure and fast and rapid iteration that people need to not just have behaviors, but mindsets around and beliefs around to make them a really a propelling force within your culture. So that should be a question. That should be a question. Someone should own that. Whoever's the culture carrier for that creativity and innovation should own that in the interview, and every candidate should get a score on that. People often forget culture.
Right. That's great. Great advice.
Well, I know Sumit is big on culture, and so do you have anything to add to that, Sumit? What are your thoughts?
I absolutely love the bit about using competencies and the actual scoring of people during the interview. But I've got a question which kind of relates to culture as well, um, which is how do you prevent bias from entering into the process in the first place? So, for example, if I'm only shortlisting people whose names sound like mine, or who look like me, or talk like me, or are from the same city as me, um, and then they're getting interviewed, they're doing well, and it's becoming kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy saying people who sound like Sumit are absolutely brilliant at what they do and they should be hired. So how do we prevent that aspect from entering into the selection process?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first and foremost, in the process and the system, there are many stage gating mechanisms that you can put in place to reduce it. The first is in the way you even write the job description. And there's all sorts of companies out there, many of which are pretty free, where you can just submit your job description and see if it even smells of bias. So many of them may be gender biased, especially in tech startups. If they're written mostly by men, they can sound a little bit like aggressively male, and they can be a bit sort of off-putting to a female candidate. So you can vet your job descriptions for bias. But then you mentioned once the candidates come in, how do you prevent that? Well, there's all sorts of ways to do that. You can extract out names and just have unique identifiers for your candidates so that when you're looking at and comparing across the candidates, you're not talking about the names and maybe even a background that you associate with a certain kind of name while you're looking at those scores. And really, if you're talking about looking at competencies and culture add, by the way, a lot of people use this phrase culture fit. That in itself can be biased, right? If what we're saying is we want to mold everybody to be exactly the same as us, so one of the best practices is to kind of refer to it more as a culture add. So let's say, for example, you're trying to capture with your strategy a certain kind of market and a really specific type of customer segment. You want to make sure you have people that represent that customer segment so that you can win them. Somebody who uniquely understands that customer segment would be a culture add. And so you can build into the process the positive side of this, where you're looking specifically for a particular underrepresented person potentially in your process and in your recruiting.
That's good. That's some really good insight there. I mean, I think that I liked how you were talking about the different elements of ensuring that you're reducing bias and you're making sure that there's people that are adding to the culture, not just as a part of it. I mean, I think that is it's part of that thought of continual improvement and driving the organization to go the right direction. But let's kind of shift gears here. Now, let's say you as a founder of a rapidly developing organization, you have your team together now. And so you have a variety of people that are contributing in different ways. How should leadership think about their talent overall?
Yeah, well, I mean, if your question is about sort of your overarching approach to strategy and leadership of the company, you've solved for the first who, right? And now you're at the now what. And the reason Jim Collins says that is because once you get the right people on the bus, it's helpful to have them to now decide the direction of the bus. And I mean, if you're talking about mission, vision, values, and purpose, relative to strategy, relative to goals and roles, most people will say, focus most of your attention on this massively transformative purpose, the long-term big vision. And I would say that has to be articulated, but I would say it's a mistake to focus most of your attention on the more fluffy things without ensuring that you actually nail it all the way down to ground level, especially in a rapidly growing company. It's the connection between that mission, vision, values, and your overarching company strategy with clear goals and roles on a short-term basis at frontline and middle management. So that's one of the biggest mistakes that I often see is now we've got all these great senior leaders. Let's say we plucked them out of some of the top big companies, right? Because they're sort of where we're going and we're hoping to grow into these places that we're plucking them from and poaching them from. They may have a little bit of a big company mentality and they would stop at mission, vision, values, and overarching company strategy. And they may not roll up sleeves and come down to their middle managers and say, this is how I want this to translate down here in your function, in your team. And I want to make sure you guys tell this down to your frontline managers. And we need to have it documented in goals that are getting reviewed quarterly to see whether we're on track or off track. That's usually where strategy and leadership falls down in a rapidly growing company, because it used to be a bunch of people who could just gather in a room. And now it's multiple offices and multiple levels and maybe different geographies and everyone's working from home. So how do we know that the frontline managers down there are instructing their teams the way we architected it up here in our ivory tower? It's all about the cascade, and it has to happen on an iterative, recursive basis very, very frequently.
So really good communication is critical,
Yeah.
Even in smaller organizations that you might take that for granted.
I would say it's probably more important because we mentioned earlier, in a lot of cases, I think Shar mentioned this, you're going to be plucking earlier career leaders in a rapidly growing company, often the people that are most attracted to an entrepreneurial environment. Let's say they were sort of mid-level managers at a top shelf tech company, but they're kind of getting antsy. They're like, I don't want to wait years for my career to take on a bigger role. So they will come to a smaller, rapidly growing place in order to earn a bigger role. That's great from a creativity and innovation standpoint. It's potentially a risk from a leadership standpoint. So a lot of them have never had to set goals and roles for teams, right? And to hold teams, larger teams, accountable. They may have had onesie, twosie, sort of sizes of teams. Now they're managing a bigger team. So it's really, it's more important to come down and ensure a tie-off of goals and roles down at the lowest levels of management in a rapidly growing company.
And I'm also thinking about the different types of roles. I mean, there's some roles that contribute in a different way, right? You mentioned that, I think in our pre-show, as far as certain roles are more strategic and some are more supportive. So can you tell us a little bit about that and how founders should be framing that?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is just focus on your top most critical 5% of roles so that you can really focus and dedicate a serious amount of attention to it, whether it's, if you don't have an A player in that role, managing out or going and getting that A player, which is going to take a certain amount of money and attraction and a compensation package. So you kind of need to have all of your people who are part of that decision making, whether it's a CEO, CFO, chief people officer, head of comp and ben, all at the table saying, okay, we've all agreed that, let's say again, it's an 80-person company and there's 4 roles, right? This top 5%. If I've got a set of like 10 chips, I'm dedicating, 4 to that top one, 3 to the next one, 2 to the next one, 1 to the last one. And we're going to put that much time, attention, energy, and money towards it. And so, can you actually first even identify who's contributing the most to revenue, specifically maybe EBITDA, from a pretty binary quantitative standpoint? Can you say, this is the person, this is the head of sales who's generating the large majority of our revenue, or there's a value protecting person, like the legal person who ensures that every one of those deals doesn't get us sued, right? So there's usually a top few people that you could really say are driving the large majority of your EBITDA, and that's where you want all your attention, and not just on the getting them into the role, but now that they're here, what are we going to do to make sure that they're successful from an onboarding standpoint, from a networking them in standpoint, coaching and development, and giving them the resources they need to be successful very early on, so they get up and up to speed fast.
So I know a lot of this. I mean, we talked about making sure your leaders are selecting the right person, and identifying the criticality of roles, and developing, ensuring that they're thinking about culture and how it impacts their organization. And then we spoke a little bit about vision, but when we're thinking about bringing on this important talent in smaller organizations that are rapidly growing, sometimes the vision can be a journey, a bit of a path. Do you see this in your leaders that you're coaching? Do you see that it's difficult for them to articulate the vision and sometimes and keep that front and center in front of their people?
Sometimes, sometimes at a company that has, let's say, more of a technical product, and they've just found product to market fit very quickly, they may be thinking a little less in terms of bigger, broader, grander visions, and so might need a little bit of the help to think on that level. I find that it's actually the reverse, though, in most cases. Usually an entrepreneurial founder has a bigger, broader vision. It's the operationalization of that vision is really where things fall down, whether it is getting from mission, vision, values all the way to strategy, or from strategy to organizational competencies. So we need to be awesome at this, this, and this, right? So if we're building premium products, we have to be great at product development and branding so we can charge the price. Or we're driving a low cost product, so we have to be awesome operationally. Just getting that clear and then turning that into a way to get and grow and keep talent and keep people aligned and manage performance. That's where things usually fall down. Helping them with vision is maybe 10, 20% of the issue. But if that is an issue, there are a lot of really cool creative ways. Let's say it didn't come naturally from the leader. There's a lot of really cool creative ways that you can co-construct that in the now what phase after you have the first two.
So here comes Shar with a comment, of course. So I'm cut from the same cloth you are, Tom, and I think some as well, probably more so. But I would say that I'm also a strategy skills consultant. So in all my corporate life of HR, talent management strategy, organizational effectiveness, change management, a lot like you, I think my competency, just speaking personally, is that I was lacking in true business strategy skills. So I'm not self-importing here, but I would say I'm working with Rich Horwath, who's a former guest speaker of ours, who teaches strategy skills. Because the competency, as all that stuff you just said, even our executives struggle with everything you said, because they don't have a full talent management strategy that is looked at on an almost weekly basis. It can't just be looked at once a year. Don't you agree? Yeah, because I think often we go as consultants or HR people, we go into the boardroom and say, well, because I had to do this 0.8 font on 8 pieces of paper because my VP was like, well, tell me more. What's your strategy? What's your strategy? As the strategist for talent management. So I had a kind of a lack of credibility with the executive team, because it was stuff like, we're going to do a leadership conference, we're going to do exit interviews, we're going to follow up on the comments on our employee surveys, all tactical activities.
Kitchen sink.
It wasn't strategic. It wasn't until I left corporate in 2016 and finally started working with Sam and improving my competency and the strategy side that I realized I need to have the credibility. I need to have the understanding of true business. And I think that's where us peoples, no offense to our profession, we often lack, right? And that's why you got the finance guys that are best friend with the people guys. So what do you think about that?
Agreed. I mean, it's HR as a field, and less so comp, actually. Comp's kind of the inverse of this, but HR as a field, people do sort of self-select into it because they're people oriented. They may be a little less data oriented. And so without, some proper training and business acumen, sometimes there can be a bit of a shortcoming there. I agree.
I love that. So yeah, I'm the kind of the Howard and I, we're the guys that are on the side of the HR equation. Nobody likes to do the
Your data.
numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's why we have people like you, Tom, and Shar and Smith that are the people. And so Howard and I can focus on the numbers for sure. But so that brings us to the next thing. I know that there's a combination of where people and numbers come together, or information as a whole, is our systems. And I know, Tom, you're very passionate about systems and how they can transform an organization, especially in the age of artificial intelligence. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, shameless plug, but this is kind of the secret sauce for Gratian Group. We have about 8 different AI products that supercharge all of the above. Everything that we've been discussing, whether it be, how to hire effectively, or develop an individual leader, or really just assess a team or an org for its performance. The products can do amazing things these days if you properly control with human intervention and oversight for things like bias, for things like data privacy, but you deliberate together. So an example of one of the things that we do from a leadership standpoint is we use AI to help with a 360 process. So, and you can do varying levels of, complicated procedures with this, but bare minimum, a 360 is just interviewing a bunch of leaders surrounding an individual leader you're trying to coach and giving them some insights about their strengths, their development areas, and maybe some coaching tips. AI is extremely good at consolidating the interview transcripts of the 10 people you interviewed and condensing it into a 2-page report that an executive can really digest. And that usually takes hours and hours and hours of an executive coach's team or the head of people's team. And so that can be tremendously shortcut. You can even conduct the interviews themselves through AI bots. If you want to interview more people, then you typically have the resources to interview. You can also do this for teams. You can assess the performance of teams. You can assess whether they trust each other or not through similar mechanisms, consolidate that down very, very quickly. And for an org, you can do things at scale that you wouldn't ordinarily be able to do. I mean, usually if you're trying to assess what's wrong with employee engagement or how your org isn't performing from a design standpoint, you kind of need a short list of maybe 20 or so people that you and your team can really go out and interview. Then you're going to crunch all of that information. You can actually now with AI interview at scale a much, much larger percentage of the organization. So it's actually counterintuitively more representative of the issues. Not only that, the AI can help you solution off of the back of it. So if you want to do something very inclusive and co-construct the solutions to any of these problems, you can come back in iterative cycles of design where the people who were interviewed are contributing to the solutions that you identified. So let's say you're going to restructure, having a smaller group of people who are in the tent contribute to the redesign through the interactions with AI. Or let's say they want to fix a talent process, like your performance management process. They can help you co-construct this with the use of AI. So it's a much quicker, faster way to do things that we used to have to rely on, just sheer arms and legs to accomplish manually in the past.
So I'm sure that there's a lot of our listeners out there that are saying, well, I'm wondering if these types of solutions that involve AI are the right fit for our organization. Because I know, artificial intelligence, whether it's involved in the recruiting process or in different parts, there's certain organizations that may be more ready than others, and there may be more of a cultural fit than others. So if they would have some questions and they want to get a hold of you, Tom, and what's the best way for them to reach out?
Yeah, super simple. Tom@gratiangroup.com.
Simple and easy. Perfect. All right. Well, we'll make sure that's in the show notes as well. So one other thing, Tom, as we're kind of wrapping up our conversation here, when we think about all that you've spoken about as far as really helping founders have that hockey stick growth and the key elements that you want to make sure that are heard today in summary, how would you kind of bring that all together?
Yeah. First who, then what? Focus on your top 5 most critical roles that are quantitatively contributed to EBITDA or supporting the generation of EBITDA. Ensure that you have A players in those roles. If you don't, focus most of the CEOs, chief people officers, head of comps, CFO's time on managing out and then getting in the right person for that, and then ensuring that they get up to speed super fast. If you're looking at what to do once they're in, focus on performance first. Motivating and engaging and retaining employees comes from winning. Figuring out super clear, not just mission, vision, values, but strategy all the way down to short-term OKRs is what helps frontline and middle managers actually generate performance out of their teams, which makes everybody pretty motivated. And you can use AI for a lot of this and make it happen in a fraction of the time.
Perfect. Now, as we come into a close here, Tom, could you let all our listeners know and how the Gratian Group can help them? I mean, what are the areas that you love to specialize in and help companies grow?
Yeah, we focus in three main areas: individual performance, whether that be executive coaching or leadership development programming. On a team performance level, we will look at a C-suite and help them iron out issues of performance, but also trust. And then at an organizational level, we can look at the large scale structure of your org and just see if it's well positioned to perform according to your strategy. And if not, help you co-construct as a leadership team the solutions to that. And we use AI for all of it.
Nice, on the cutting edge there. Perfect. Well, thanks, Tom, for your time today. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks so much, Sam. Thanks, Shars. Thanks, Howard. Thanks, Amit.
Thank you, Tom.
It's nice meeting you. Thank you so much. I'll connect with you on LinkedIn.
Sounds great.
All right. Well, take care, everyone, and we'll see you next week.